Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Kira and I'm really excited to share around discerning between hearing yourself and hearing the Holy Spirit. Because I feel like this is something that isn't talked enough about in church and in Christianity. This idea of if we're supposed to be following the Holy Spirit, how do we make sure that we're actually hearing the Holy Spirit versus just hearing ourselves and our own thoughts? And so I wanted to look today at Galatians 5:16 through 23, which says this in the New Living Translation. So I say, let the Holy Spirit guide your lives, then you won't be doing whatever your sinful nature craves. The sinful nature wants you to do evil, which is the exact opposite of what the Holy Spirit wants. And the Spirit gives us desires that are opposite of what the sinful nature desires. These two forces are constantly fighting each other. So you are not free to carry out your good intentions. But when you are directed by the Spirit, you are not under obligation of the law of Moses. And then it says the nature of us, the nature of humanity. It says, when you follow the desires of your sinful nature, the results are very clear. Sexual immorality, impurity, lustful pleasures, idolatry, sorcery, hostility, quarreling, jealousy, outbursts of anger, selfish ambition, dissension, division, envy, drunkenness, wild parties, and other sins like that. That's a lot. And we look at that, and that is showing us what our sinful nature looks like and desires. And then it says in verse 22, Paul is saying, but the Holy Spirit produces these kinds of fruit in our lives: love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control, otherwise known as the fruits of the Spirit. And so Paul does a really good job of contrasting the fruit of the Spirit and the fruit of our sinful desires, and he aligns these, and I think it can be a really good measuring stick for us in discerning whether or not what we're feeling inside of us is the Holy Spirit or if it's ourselves. And a good way to measure that is what will be the fruit of that little voice in your head if it's the Holy Spirit. Is it going to produce love, joy, peace, patience, the fruits of the Spirit, or is it going to produce, on the other hand, sexual immorality, impurity, lustful pleasures, anger, selfish ambition, division, dissension, the like? Whatever the fruit of the thought would be, you can put it in one of these two categories of, is it part of my sinful nature that would be me just wanting what I want, or is it part of the nature of the fruit of the Spirit, which would be the things that the Holy Spirit resides over and would be prompting me towards? I love this in the Message translation as well, because it highlights these so vividly that I think it's a little easier in today's language. It says, this is Paul speaking again in 16 through 23, but in the Message translation, it says, my counsel is this: live freely, animated and motivated by God's Spirit. Then you will not feed the compulsions of selfishness, for there is a root of sinful self-interest that is in us and is at odds with a free spirit, just as the free spirit is incompatible with selfishness. Paul is addressing, look, even though we are following after Jesus and doing our very best to model our lives and reflect him, we still are human and we still make mistakes, we still mess up, but then we also still have these sinful desires in us. And even though we are not trying to follow them, it says that root is still there. And he's like, we're not following that. He says that is at odds with the Holy Spirit. And so you can only follow one or the other, not both at the same time. He says, so when you choose the Holy Spirit, you're living freely, animated and motivated by him. That this is the outcome of making that choice. That this is what we have. And then it goes into verses 19 through 21, which talks about the sinful nature. It says, isn't it obvious what kind of life develops out of you trying to get your own way all the time? Repetitive, loveless, cheap sex, a stinking accumulation of mental and emotional garbage, frenzied and joyless grabs for happiness, trinket gods, magic show, religion, paranoid loneliness, cutthroat competition, all-consuming yet never satisfied wants, a brutal temper, an impotence to love or be loved, divided homes and divided lives, small-minded and lopsided pursuits, the vicious habit of depersonalizing everyone into a rival, uncontrolled and uncontrollable addictions, ugly parodies of community. I could go on. He literally says that as it finishes. And I think that this puts it in a very modern way of looking at it, of like, look, this is what happens when we follow our flesh, when we follow the things that we want, sinful nature. This is what it leads to. And I think we can all look at this list and pull out one or two of, maybe you have not developed an uncontrolled or uncontrollable addiction, but you can see how these things have played out, maybe not in your own life, but in the others around you. And that you can see that, hey, yes, I have, when I go after the things I want, an all-consuming yet never satisfied want, that there are things in this list that you're like, yeah, my desires have led me down that path, and it just doesn't end up working out very well, even though that's what I crave in the moment. And then Paul goes on and says the fruits of the Spirit. He says, but what happens when we live God's way? What happens when we live in response to the Holy Spirit, in response to what the Holy Spirit prompts us to do, and we obey? It says, he brings gifts into our lives, much the same way fruit appears in an orchard. Things like affection for others, exuberance about life, serenity. We develop a willingness to stick to things, a sense of compassion in the heart, a conviction that a basic holiness permeates things and people. We find ourselves involved in loyal commitments, not needing to force our way in life, able to marshal and direct our energies wisely. I love this stark contrast, and it's a good reminder to us of how can we make informed choices about what we are discerning in our head. Like, sometimes I'm like, yeah, I feel like I'm hearing a yes for that when it's something I really want, and I can tell myself, I'm like, yeah, there's a yes there. But if I would follow it through and say, what would the fruit of that choice be? Well, it would be really self-serving. It would maybe put others at a disadvantage. And we can go through and say, okay, is the fruit more like the first part, what happens when we live our way, or is it more of the second part when we live God's way and have the fruit of the Spirit? And so I found this really helpful in distinguishing from my own thoughts of, hey, is this what God's calling me to? Or is this just my head wanting what I want, being a human? And I just think that if we take a moment, we can distinguish pretty easily whether it's God talking to us through the Holy Spirit or whether it's ourselves. And so I pray this is an encouragement to you this week, that you can discern the Holy Spirit better, because I think it's something we don't talk enough about. If we're going to talk about the Holy Spirit, we need to talk about how to hear him and how to know if we're hearing him correctly. So I pray this is an encouragement. And if you are a girl and you want to join Flourish Sisterhood, which is an online community that myself and one of my good friends has started, feel free to look down below in the bio. We'll have the link there that you can click on. We have an Instagram page. We also have a Zoom Bible study going on. So if you're anywhere in the world, you can join. And we also have in-person meetups in Southern California if you are in that area. So feel free to come and join us. We are so excited for what God's doing there, and just excited to share with you that platform. And as always, if you have any questions, comments, leave them down below. I'll answer them. And if you have any prayer requests, please share. I would love to pray for you. You can either leave it in the comments or you can DM me on Instagram and I will get back to you. But I hope you all have an amazing day, and I will see you in next week's video.